President Trump is sympathetic about former President Biden's advanced prostate cancer diagnosis, but he's also raising pretty important questions about the timeline surrounding it, and he wants answers.
I think it's very sad, actually. I'm surprised that it wasn't, the public wasn't notified a long time ago, because to get to stage 9, that's a long time. There are things going on that the public wasn't informed, and I think somebody's going to have to speak to his doctor, if it's the same, or even if it's two separate doctors. Why wasn't the cognitive ability, why wasn't that discussed? And I think the doctor said he's just fine, and it's turned out that's not so. It's very dangerous. Look, this is no longer politically correct. This is dangerous for our country. So it's a very, very sad situation, and I feel very badly about it. And I think people should try and find out what happened. Somebody is not telling the facts. That's a big problem.
Emily, there's so much we need to learn. And what is interesting, and MSNBC doctor flagged this yesterday, and we dug into it, and here's what we found. These are PSA numbers that past presidents have put in their medical reports. You can see all of them. I mean, down to, a second numeral there, a second digit. President Trump, Obama, Bush. The brain room could not find any indication that Biden had taken this test. That makes one of two options possible. Maybe he took the test and it wasn't included in the report, or he didn't. I would just note the Wall Street Journal has a great article out about there are some recommendations of not taking this test over 75. I hope that wasn't the case. I think the president should be tested. He's the president of the United States. But a lot of questions why these three presidents took it, and we have no evidence that Biden did.
Of course. Look, I see it. I mean, it's not necessarily a binary choice only, but it seems pretty clear to me that it's either gross negligence that can border on criminal, or it's an absolute obfuscation from the American people yet again, and then a resulting cover-up yet again. And for daring to ask questions throughout the prior administration, journalists and reporters, especially from Fox News and those in the mainstream media who were independent, who dared to ask those questions, were vilified, oftentimes on public television, for daring to question any type of acuity or anyone covering up. That simple fact was absolutely torn apart and shamed. And now we are hearing that potentially to the detriment of a beloved human, that he might have, look, we can't conjecture whether indeed the diagnosis came at the certain point that we were told, which was Friday, or whether it was known before. But I'll say that, my best friend tested positive for prostate cancer as a 45-year-old. And the point is that his team of doctors was monitoring the PSA levels, and the instant that it ticked above the precancerous to cancerous level, then he went through the surgery. So if that's the level of care, per the risk factors associated with his biology of a 45-year-old, then to have an 80-plus and the president to either not do it or to do it and hide it from the American people, as our commander-in-chief was battling that, either option is unacceptable.
No doubt. And this comes on the background of the Her audio, which shows very concerning symptoms from the president about his mental acuity. Harris, I want to bring up to you a frightening quote from that Alex Thompson book out today. It was previewed in The Atlantic, and here is the quote. 5 people were running the country, and Joe Biden was at best a senior board member. Not commander-in-chief, elected by the American people, a senior board member.
Who were the 5 people?
That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Is there a chapter on that?
Yeah.
I mean, look, a lot of this is they want to sell books. We totally get that from the 4 that are already dropping. But the other part of this is they didn't do their jobs contemporaneously. And I know we give a lot of credit to Alex Thompson with Axios. He got that White House Correspondents Award for having been one of the people to cover this along the way about the president was slipping and falling and not sentient at times, it would seem. All of that. But the investigation ensues. And when you hear people like, I believe it was David Axelrod earlier today, forgive me if not, but I think so, saying, well, you really want to back off him now. This gives a little bit of room to be softer on him as you look back at his legacy and have questions. No. We can do 2 things at once. We can totally have a heart for a man who's suffering with late-stage cancer. Right? We totally have room for that and room in our prayers for all of it. He's part of our legacy here as the United States of America. What we cannot tolerate is a shutdown of the press again. They were volunteering to do it last time around. They were complicit in the cover-up, in my estimation. Now you can't be that. You've got to start to ask the questions. Who handed President Trump what? Who were the supposed 5 people, if that right, or even if that journalist even gets it right. Were they elected?
Yeah.
Who elected them? Was Jill Biden, his wife, one of them? How did she find the time? She had an aging man with a poor memory who couldn't face classified documents.
Yep.
Well, testimony and investigation.
You think about those final cabinet meetings as well that were literally ran by Jill Biden. You have to think that his cabinet was asking the question, where is Joe? They hid the unhideable, really, for as long as they could because they knew they could. Think of all the things that are Democrat run, right? Of course, legacy media, Hollywood, entertainment, academia, corporate America. Unfortunately, even our judicial system seems to be run by activists in several cases, especially towards President Trump. It's really, really tragic stuff that we, as the American people, have to reap the I guess, benefits or lack thereof. Really tragic.
Yeah, I want to get to why this matters, John Yoo, because I have seen people say, why are we going back in time? Very important we go back in time. And here's why. It occurred to me yesterday that there was a moment in the presidency where a lot of people said Joe Biden lied. And it was when he did an interview with George Stephanopoulos, and he said he could not recall anyone telling him to leave 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. He could not recall. And everyone called it a lie. But I think there are new questions today as to whether he truly could not recall what generals were telling him. And I want to play what the generals said they told him, and then what Joe Biden told the nation with the renewed context of his memory.
I recommended that we maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. And I also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government.
General Milley, I assume you agree with that in terms of the recommendation of 2,500?
What I said in my opening statement and the memoranda that I wrote back in the fall of 2020 remained consistent, and I do agree with that.
Your top military advisors warned against withdrawing on this timeline. They wanted you to keep about 2,500 troops.
No, they didn't. It was split. That wasn't true. That wasn't true.
They didn't tell you that they wanted troops to stay?
No, not in terms of whether we were going to get out in a time frame, all troops. They didn't argue against that. No one said that to me that I can recall.
13 people, heroes, died at the Abbey Gate, and I have a lot of new questions about what happened that day.
There's got to be an investigation, and we shouldn't rely on the media, as Harris said, to do it. We got to have a congressional investigation to make sure that the president, it's not just backward-looking, to make sure that the presidency hasn't become dysfunctional. That's not so easy for staff and aides, none of whom were elected, to exercise the power that the American people voted in actually one person, and not to spread it out, not to have Jill Biden doing it, not to have chiefs of staff doing it, but to have the president doing it. And that's because the founders in the Constitution concentrated all this power in one person, the president. We rely on that single person, now Donald Trump, to protect the nation's security. Look at what a bad job Biden did in Afghanistan, as you mentioned, Kayleigh. What would have happened if China had invaded Taiwan during Biden's presidency? What would have happened if Tehran had gotten a nuclear weapon and dropped one on Jerusalem? I'm sorry, on Tel Aviv. They wouldn't want to hit Jerusalem, but Tel Aviv. That gives you the idea of the stakes. And so we can't just say, oh, it's just one president, one time only. This is something that could be a structural defect in the way our presidency is working now. I think this is what Congress should do. They should have a special committee like we had for Iran-Contra, like we had for Watergate. And here's another idea. They should make Robert Hur the special counsel.
I love that.
Really? That's interesting.
Last question for you, because I've read a lot of your work about the constitutional power of the executive, and it's spot on. Did you ever imagine that constitutional power of the executive would be filled by a board of 5 unknown individuals?
It's a great point. I think what the founders thought our presidents would have energy in the executive. That's the phrase they used. They wanted the president to act with decision and speed. Those are the adjectives that definitely don't describe Joe Biden in his waning years. And so I think this might be a problem that we have with the presidency. We didn't think we would have these incompetent presidents.
Yeah, alacrity and speed. Well, that characterized the auto pen that he had, apparently. All right.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.